start our recording, and I'm going to welcome you to our session today. My name is John Pfeffer. I'm the Director of Foreign Policy in Focus at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., and I also direct our Global Just Transitions project. I will put a link in the chat to our project so you can see what work we have been doing. Today, I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to our session on how Russia's war against Ukraine impacts the planet. We have two wonderful presenters with us today from Ukraine. We also have translation in Spanish at the bottom of your screen. If you click there, if you have a problem, just put a note in chat. We are going to take questions and answers, or we're going to take questions and we'll provide the answers. Please use the Q&A function also at the bottom of the screen. And we are recording this session and it will be available on YouTube shortly after the session is over. I'd like to introduce our two panelists today. Very fortunate to have Yevheniia Zasiadko, Head of Climate Department at the NGO Center for Environmental Initiatives called Ecoaction, a Ukrainian NGO. She's a climate policy expert. For the last 3 years, her work has been dedicated to raising the ambitions of national climate policy through working with the authorities, through NGOs, and involving people in the decision-making process. After Russia's invasion last February of last year, she also started to coordinate work regarding the monitoring of potential negative environmental and climate effects of the war. She holds a master's degree in environmental protection and she has more than 8 years of experience in related areas. We're also joined by Anna Ackermann. I'm going to introduce Anna before she presents, which will come after Yevheniia has presented. They both are using the same PowerPoint presentation, so they're going to share the screen, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Yevheniia, and thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the raising this topic. I'm going to share the presentation. Please let me know if you can see. Okay. So yeah, our presentation today is how Russian war against Ukraine impacts the planet. First of all, we're going to talk about Ukraine and how it's directly impacted us. And since the war started, Ecoaction been engaged in monitoring environmental consequences of this war. And actually, this initiative started from the Ministry of Environment of Ukraine. So they invite civil society scientists during the second week of the war and asked to help them to monitor, because it was clear even at that time that the consequences we are facing are like huge. And we need to know what's actually happening from this side too. So not only talk about war crimes or the crimes against humanity, but also talk about environmental impact. And since then we are keep monitoring it. So it's already 14 months, even more. It's almost 1,000 cases that we have now, 990 as you can see. At the beginning, it was half of our team of Ecoaction been engaged in monitoring. We divided different regions and monitored what is happening, because at the beginning, Russia actually targeted all around Ukraine different facilities, bombed different objects. So that's why our plans, that's why we categorized and create our methodology by what we're actually monitoring and keep monitoring until now, this impact. So we are monitoring by the damage to the industrial facility, energy safety, impact to the ecosystem, impact to the marine ecosystem, livestock waste, nuclear safety, and other military actions. We divide in nuclear safety because it's actually the topic was too important, too scary, especially like after Russians occupied Chernobyl station, after they also occupied Zaporizhia nuclear power plant station, which is like working, and they're still there. And like we keep monitoring that sometimes the missiles flying over there, or some explosions happening. So that's why we actually like separated the energy safety and nuclear safety. And other military actions actually include all missiles attacks, mine territory in Ukraine. So in some regions, like in my hometown, we actually had like sometimes during the day, 1,000 of missiles just in one city. So it was not impossible to like monitor like missile by missile, but we know like some numbers that published by Minister of Defense about mine territories, especially like the territory that Russians been, so it's mine. And from this side, the consequences is huge, but we are not even speak about them now. Like so there is already started work for the mining some territories that been liberated, but still by some data, by some experts, they saying that to demine all Ukraine after the war, we would need like at least 10-15 years. It's the minimum, and if there would be like really invested a lot of efforts in that. But we also have not long time ago Balkans example that after 30 years ago, they still have a heavy mined territory, which is like still under high risk. I would also wanted to pay attention that actually this 990 cases, it's not the whole scale of real impact. It's only what was able to monitor from the media. So Ecoaction, any of our colleagues or the volunteers or the people who have sent us any information, we've never been real at that places. So we never, at least until now, we didn't make like a real checkup. But I'm gonna mention a bit later about research that we recently published related to this also work. But the mostly this work is done by monitoring the media resources, regional, national. So whatever is happening, we are gathering this in our database. Now we have a group of volunteers who's helping us to do it. So at the beginning, we did it by our staff, and now the people, volunteers engaged in this. And as you might see, by the categories like in the region, now the top region with the like top number is the Dnipropetrovsk region, which is you might see that, for example, Donetsk and Luhansk, which is in Zaporizhia, which is like one of the top regions where like now they have bombings and all this military actions is happening now. The numbers is not that big compared to Dnipropetrovsk region. Why is so? Because that region is still occupied. We don't know what's happening really there. There is no independent journalism. There is no Ukrainian representative in Luhansk and Donetsk region. We couldn't even go to occupied area since 2014. So we don't know the real situation there is, and like probably during the last 9 years, the situation there is much worse. But it's like what we're able to do with the current situation to understand. We're also planning to have a fact-finding mission to understand the real pollution on the soil, on the water in the future. to actually understood what the real risk for us, and like to raise the question of possible solution in the future, because even though the war is still going, the people are still living there. The moment when the territory is liberated, usually people starting to grow up something on this land, even though it can be like heavily polluted after all bombings and attacks that it was before. And not only Ukraine actually also was an East industrial country, and East and South of Ukraine, we had like a lot of industry. And when the Russians came, they destroyed like a lot, like around 50% of our industry in Kharkiv, in Zaporizhia, in Mariupol, in Dnipro, or been destroyed or under occupation. Probably everyone saw the pictures from Mariupol and what happened to the industry there. And it's not the only case, it happened all around. So from this perspective, we saw a huge risk that Ukraine actually like a heavy industrial country. We have a lot of heavy metal, chemical industry that might also impact, have the impact after like this industry is destroyed. So from this perspective, that's why we also divide a separate damage to industrial facilities, to also keep in mind that from this side, so it's not only risk done by military actions, but also Russian targeted like a livestock waste facilities. And for example, in one region, the river Ecoaction been contaminated. So in a close region, in a few days, the fish was dead. So it's affecting the whole regions, and it's not only like a local impact that could happen. And from the regional perspective, it's also important to mention impact to the marine ecosystem, and a lot of Russians ships, ferries are still there. They're also bombing the ships and ferries that in the Black Sea or Azov, but mostly it was in Black Sea. You can see yellow dots on the map. So they targeted like different ships. It wasn't only Ukrainians, it was also some international one that they targeted, but it had an impact on marine ecosystem. They also mined the Black Sea, so there is a lot of mines, which also affect the whole ecosystem. So from this effect, it might also affect other countries, not only Ukraine. It's Georgia, Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, who have a connection with the Black Sea and using anyhow the marine ecosystem. I partly mentioned about occupation Zaporizhia nuclear power plant station, and yesterday actually was the 37th anniversary of Chernobyl disaster. So this topic for us is very heartful, especially now with the Zaporizhia occupation, and probably like the whole world followed during the spring and summer what was happening there, because there was like a big risk of any explosions. By experts, some experts are saying if anything is going to happen to Chernobyl, it means that the explosion, so it the scale of the effect could be like Chernobyl, but with the difference that it's also close to the Black Sea and the Azov Sea, so it might also impact the whole marine system in the sea that we have. During our monitoring, we also monitor the missile flight over Russians, explode some mines and bombs on the territory of Zaporizhia station. They targeted civilian people who's working at the nuclear power plant station. So the tragedy of this facility is huge. They're still there. They're still using it as a military facility, even though a nuclear station never been built for the wartime. and with any risks or anything, it might like impact not only Ukraine or Russia, it might impact actually the whole world. So that's why it's very important to withdraw Russia from also Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant station, not only like from Ukraine, of course, and from Zaporizhzhia, because it might also have an impact on the whole world. And here you can see the modulation of potential impact if it like would happen. So it's using the potential weather information, and with the explosion on nuclear station, the effect might also depends on the weather condition, how strong the wind, on what side it's actually blowing. So Russia actually can use any moment when the wind is blowing to the side of Ukraine, Europe, north or south. By some experts, they saying that we are kind of still lucky that nothing happened yet, but we don't know what can happen like in the next future. So that's why this tragedy is another one that Russia should pay for the crimes that they are committing. By the way, that monitors that we are doing with the map, we can't call, for example, all of that cases environmental crimes or ecocide, because not all of them are like have that big scale of effect. That's why like we're calling them cases, and even the small cases can impact the environment, but there is also a big scale of activities like that they are targeting all facilities, and more than 30 been destroyed. They also, when Russia is occupied in some territories, usually they cut in electricity. So Lugansk and Donetsk region, they have more than 30 coal mines flooded, and 30 of them was since 2014. So the war didn't start in Ukraine in February 2022. It started like way before in 2014, and this region been actually heavy affected since then, and coal mines is flooded. So the moment when the territory is liberated, it can open for us like a lot of challenges from the perspective of environment and the safety for the people who is living there and going to live. And the risk of nuclear energy sector, based that yesterday was also Chernobyl. Zaporizhzhia is actually the largest nuclear power plant station in Europe, and we have 6 units which like working there. Russian troops is there since 4th March, and as I mentioned, that Ukrainian people are still there, and they've been tortured. They are under stress. Some of them like even never had a chance to leave the Zaporizhzhia station since there. So it's the Ukrainian people is working under huge stress. And with the nuclear, it's actually it's so unique sector that it's impossible to bring like people just from the street to work there. So it should be like a specific experts who is working there. Even though Russians brought like some nuclear experts from Russian nuclear facilities, it doesn't mean that they actually know how to deal with the Zaporizhzhia, because all of them is kind of also different and unique. So that's why Ukrainian people are still there and actually trying to keep safe the whole world from this threat. And actually with the we have now like 2 types of heroes. It's one is the military, and another one is the people who's working in energy sector, because during the winter when we had a electricity cut with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant station, the people was able to fix and deal with all this risk that Russia created during the last 14 months. and like keep people safe and help them to survive this. And yeah, unfortunately, the international response have been weak to all these threats, especially from the energy sector. Russia still didn't face any sanctions on Rosatom, so they're still selling nuclear fuel to Europe and to other countries, and it's like still even not under like a real discussion, not put in any sanction package, which should be done after what they actually did with their nuclear facilities in Ukraine. And another mention that we did during the last year and during the COP, we presented this research. It's climate consequences of this war. There is usually not that many discussion about environmental consequences, but there is never, I would say, discussion about climate consequences of this war. So Ecoaction, together with international experts, been engaged in estimating the climate damages. So we try to understand the emission from the actions that Russia did in Ukraine. And so there was also a few categories, a few sectors. So it's the movement of disabled, like of refugees, warfare, fires, reconstruction of civilian infrastructure, because Russia targeted like a lot of our houses, hospitals, kindergarten, roads, which needed to be rebuilt. So just to reconstruct all this infrastructure, we're gonna need to do like a lot of CO2 emission. We already do some reconstruction work in Ukraine, and my colleague is gonna talk about that. But to actually rebuild Ukraine to the same what was happened during the war, like we will do like additional CO2 emission in the future. This numbers is only for first 7 months of the war. We plan to have an update during the Bonn in June for the 12 months of the war, full scale, I mean. So that's why during the first 7 months of the war, but it's also including the leakage from the Nord Stream, that there was explosion and methane leakage, which kind of not that much related to Ukraine, but also we think that it's connected to Ukraine, that Russia just didn't want to, they tried to manipulate with the gas, so they made the explosion, so Ukraine would not get military support or anything. So that's why they decided that it's also related to Ukraine. So in total, we have emission like almost 100 million CO2 emission, which is related to emission of Netherlands or Belgium to the same 7 months. So the emission just from the like military actions or the war that affected in Ukraine, we like provide as a country, one of the European country. But still we also had like other emission that, because we're still living in Ukraine and still producing emissions. So actually through this aspect, Russia affected the whole world. They actually like affect the whole climate discussions, the policy making, all these negotiations that have been done before. It's now some of them like become irrelevant, and with this additional CO2 emission, and that's going to be in the future, and that's only like in a prospect of Ukraine, but actually this war affects from the different prospect also other countries too, other continents even, which we can discuss a bit later. And another that we wanted to present, it's also the research that we had during in February this year. It's impact of Russian war against Ukraine on condition on Ukrainian soil. Soil is very important resource for Ukraine. Our economy is based on agriculture. It's 40% of our economy was from agriculture. So the soil is important, but at the same time, it's like at some part of Ukraine, it's heavy polluted after the military. We had a chance to take some samples from Kharkiv region and Kherson, which military helped us, and some local people gave us the samples. So it was the first research on the pollution, soil pollution in Ukraine, but we are planning also to continue and to develop this part to actually understand the real consequences, the real pollution in different part of Ukraine, to understand how we can solve and how we can deal. But at the same time, we think that heavy polluted area in Ukraine should become like a conservated, like nature protected zone. And there is example in France that they still have conservated territory after the Second World War, and it's still polluted. So unfortunately, like some territories of Ukraine might become, from positive side, it's maybe good that we're going to have more nature protected zone, but it's not of the reason that of the biodiversity or ecosystem, just because it's too dangerous to grow and to do anything on the territories. Yeah. Plus minus, I mentioned everything. I'm not sure how much time do I have. So yeah, and together with different NGO, we like had call action to the international communities of what should be done for Ukraine to help us. It's strengthen Ukrainian emergency response capacity, secure the demilitarization and the occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant station, which is like crucial now, and it's a risk for the whole world. Support ongoing work to identify, document, and assess environmental damage and the impact on public health, which it becomes some work of monitoring, but it's still not enough, and we're lacking of the capacities. We don't have enough experts. We never, even that the war started since 2014, it actually up until the February didn't affect that much from this side. So that's why we actually lacking now the capacities of the experts, of the knowledge how to do it. Humanitarian actors and the mining organization should address environmental factors in their field of operation, because during the mining there is also pollution is happening. So it's important actually to know it and to know how to deal with this. And humanitarian actors can actually help. Unfortunately, the voice from environment side is not that strong as from the humanitarian side, so it might help us to bring attention also to this war. And it's important to mention that why we actually did this work and why we are still monitoring that. I think I mentioned that the consequences would be like in the long term, in the long run. And as example of France, they still have affected territories after Second World War. So some Ukrainian part might become affected in the long run, but some of them also like might be affected at least in a mid-term timeline, which also gonna affect the society who's living in Ukraine. The fifth one is develop mechanism and structure to ensure accountability for the damage to Ukraine environment. And there was established a few international platforms, initiatives, but for now, we as a civil society, we didn't see a lot of activities from that. So luckily, soon we will see, and if anyone like have enough experts or experience in that, it might help also Ukraine ensure Ukrainian recovery in green and sustainable way, which is crucial for us, and like to rebuild Ukraine in better ways. we need to like have green and sustainable Ukraine. And actually the reconstruction is happening now. So it's not, we don't need to wait like until the war would stop. It's happening now. And it's important to have now this vision of green and sustainability. Mainstreaming the environmental protection in the military doctrine, maintain visibility of environmental dissemination of the war, address the impact of the war on the climate, which actually never been addressed or like was never that active addressed as, for example, environment, even though this both topic never been addressed too much during any wars or conflicts before. But with the climate, the situation even worse, but it should be also be addressed and discussed. And from this perspective, Russia also should be bring to justice. And the last one is develop the global environment, peace and security agenda. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna give the floor to Anna.
Thank you. Thank you, Yevheniia. That was wonderful. And I put a link to the PowerPoint in the chat. So if anybody wants to be following the PowerPoint or return to some of those slides later, please follow that link. I'm now going to introduce Anna Ackermann. Anna is climate and energy policy professional, a board member, the Center for Environmental Initiatives, Ecoaction, Ecoaction, and a policy analyst at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, where she works on the green reconstruction of Ukraine. Before joining the NGO sector, she worked on international energy and energy efficiency projects, and she has 2 masters, one in power engineering and the other in environmental sciences, policy, and management. I want to remind folks to put their questions in the Q&A. We already have one on about Ukraine's overall emissions in a year for comparison purposes, but please add any others you have, and you can also use the chat for sharing other materials. And yes, Cheryl, I'll repost that PowerPoint link as soon as I pass the baton over to Anna. So thank you, Anna, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much for the very kind invitation. I am sharing the screen, the same presentation that is accessible through the very same link. So just a moment. Now it doesn't work. Just a second. I'll try again. Let's see if it works. But maybe before, as I'm trying to share the screen, I wanted to also mention that a few words about Ecoaction. As we both, well, I worked in Ecoaction myself. I'm a board member, and Yevheniia is a part of the staff. It's the organization that of more than 30 people. Most of them are based in Ukraine at the moment, and in normal times, Ecoaction is working on climate policies, on sustainable agriculture policies for Ukraine, and also on the energy transition. And once the war broke out, well, the full-scale invasion started. The war, of course, started in 2014. With the full-scale invasion, the first reaction of most of the staff members was that everything that we had been doing before was not relevant. Somehow. So this is why we started searching for ways to help Ukraine and to do at least something. And one of the things that we thought was important to do was to collect this data and information about damages to the environment. And this work is now still going on thanks to the support of our volunteers. But then in the end, interestingly enough, when well, after a few months, we started slowly getting back to understanding that things we did before, the topics we worked before, are still as relevant and probably as relevant as never. But we have to be viewing them from another perspective, and this perspective is reconstruction and rebuilding the country better. With stronger climate policies, again, with better agriculture practices, and with the energy transition that has to be speeded up. So therefore, we'll try and see if there is any issue. I will share not a full screen, but a small screen. So hopefully you can see at least part of the partially the slides, but you can also be tracking the information online. So I will try again to share the slideshow. Oh, it doesn't work. There is some.
I can share it from my screen if you want, and just
All right,
tell me
well,
when to.
let's try. Let's try. That works. Sorry for that. I was actually just before the beginning of the webinar saying that sometimes it doesn't work for me. We practiced and it worked. No, it doesn't. Excellent. Thank you very much. So we can straight away move to the next slide. So Yevheniia described a few different topics. Again, we were talking about the damages to the environment. This is just part, of course, of all of the damages that we see in Ukraine. The analysis, of course, there is like different organizations could do the analysis and analyze the damages and how much it would actually cost to put a price tag on that, because we want, among other things, Russia to pay for what they are doing. So here you can see, first of all, an estimate of direct damages to the infrastructure in general, so to physical infrastructure in this table. It is compiled by the Kyiv School of Economics and ministries and so on. So you can see that the largest damage that is caused is to housing, to buildings, to infrastructure, so to roads, rails, and so on, and to the industry. These constitute one of the largest parts. So these are the direct damages, and the price tag of this direct damages is some $140 billion. At the same time, the World Bank has already released two reports, the Rapid Needs Assessment reports for Ukraine, where they assess direct damages and also indirect damages, meaning how much it would cost to actually rebuild Ukraine, to rebuild Ukraine better, to not just be rebuilding the country that we had before with the old standards, because actually the old standards don't exist, we have new standards. And we are also moving toward the European Union, so we have to catch up with the European Union standards. And in the end, so in the latest assessment report, the World Bank estimates the price of rebuilding Ukraine of $411 billion. We understand that as Russia's aggression continues, this price is increasing every day. So there you go. This is how much it. You can compare it to different numbers of how much that is. There's definitely much more than the annual state budget of Ukraine many times, and there will be lots of participation from different stakeholders in rebuilding Ukraine. And on the next slide, I want to say, so you can go to the already next, thank you, next picture. So there is the map of Ukraine. And here I would like to mention why we are talking about rebuilding Ukraine already today. Because I understand for many it sounds strange. How come you have the war, you have to fight, but at the same time you're talking about reconstruction? Why? And we have actually international conferences on reconstruction of Ukraine happening. So we had a large one in Switzerland last year. We will have a big one in London in June this year. And yesterday there was a big conference on Ukraine recovery in Italy, in Rome. With the Ukrainian government participating, Italian government and Italian and Ukrainian businesses discussing and so on. So this is taking place already now. Why? Because in fact, Ukraine is a very big country. It's the largest country in Europe, comparable to France. France is larger if we take into account all of its islands, but Ukraine is really big. Well, the war itself, so the front line is in the east of the country and the south. And here you can see this split actually, again, because it's a big country, you don't feel the war itself the same way. And the different regions have different concerns. So those regions marked out in yellow here, in fact, what they saw, and some of those cities saw even an economic increase because they had internally displaced persons who came to live there. Some cities saw tens of thousands of refugees who moved in to live in the cities and brought with them their families and of course also their businesses too, and opened new businesses. So some of the large industrial facilities also moved to the west, to those regions, because they are safer, because they're not being shelled. And Yevheniia showed the map already previously how the shelling looks like, even to the environment, generally speaking, but also it would be, we can put it on this map too. So the western regions are not as, don't feel this as much as the eastern ones, of course, the war itself. And they also have some kind of a privilege to be thinking long term. And you can hear about our western and some northern cities, but not only them, but they are planning, they are developing their climate and energy plans for 2030. They're trying to understand how to manage the internally displaced persons, how to actually build whole new parts of the cities for those people. And they want to build them again better, how to develop the infrastructure, transport infrastructure for them, and so on. While in the north of the country, so this light blue region, some of those territories were temporarily occupied by Russia in February and March last year, and then liberated by the Ukrainian army. The damages there are very big, but the mining is already happening. And reconstruction is already going on too. So the whole world heard about Bucha, Irpin in the north of Kiev. Those cities which were heavily destroyed, they have been rebuilt already today. So you can actually go there and see how this is happening already today. Of course, the situation is much more complicated, again, as I said, in the east, especially in the front lines and so on, where whole cities have been destroyed absolutely to the ground. Fighting is still going on and so on, such in Bakhmut, in Marinka, in Vuhledar, and so on. So for this country, so for Ukraine, for some parts, we are talking about rebuilding the country from, or the cities from scratch, so actually developing whole new plans. And for other parts of the country, we already have the infrastructure in place, things in place. So we are thinking how to improve, how to enlarge, how to change the economy, and so on, and how to think long-term already today. And they also have some of the concerns. So the Western regions, they also want financial resources already today. And unfortunately, they are not coming because the insurance is now an issue and so on. And now the question is, who's going to be paying, who's going to be rebuilding and so on. Ukraine will not be able to do that, of course, because again, the economy was going down and so on, and we would not have enough resources because everything is going into fighting the aggressor at the moment. So next slide, we can see the map, and this is how, so you can take it with level of seriousness, you know, a different level of seriousness, but it's just to give you an example of an idea that the government had. Last year, they presented this map, and they suggested to different countries to take on certain regions or cities and to help rebuild those. So those regions and cities that were affected by the war. Or even not, you can see there is in the West, there is Italy responsible for Rivne and so on. So this is one of the ideas that existed. But in the end, what happened is that as Ukraine became the EU candidate country in June last year, while the US remains a very important and the critical partner for the military assistance, together with G7 countries, of course, the EU is most likely to become the most critical partner for the reconstruction. So the European Union started the process of linking up all of the different donors, so International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and EBRD and different banks, development banks, and everybody who wants to be involved anyhow in Ukraine reconstruction, together with G7 countries and Ukrainian government, and trying to understand how to actually rebuild together. But EU here is the main coordinator and in a way, the main partner again for Ukraine for reconstruction, because Ukraine is the EU candidate country and because Ukraine has to be moving toward the European standards, climate neutrality goals, and everything that EU is has in place as policies. Next, on the next slide, I just wanted to say that last year we started talking again because we were discussing about reconstruction quite quickly to my own surprise, but it came naturally because we thought we have to be already talking about rebuilding because reconstruction already started. It's already starting now, not only discussions, but physically. So how to make it better? And together with many organizations, we sat down and we thought, okay, if we want to build the country green, what does it actually mean? What would be the main principles? And the main principles around that, I will not be going into details, but basically, it's not only about the environment, but it's also a lot about public participation, how to make sure that the communities are engaged, and also how to make sure that those international funds that will be coming, that they are effectively used, and that Ukraine aspires to build the green economy, that we would not be just building up the roads the way we know them, or there was a city, we build again the city, but we don't try to change the idea of why the city exists. And this is relevant for some parts of the country, especially for the eastern Ukraine, where the war is still going on, and also the temporarily occupied regions, which were all about heavy industry, coal, and so on. We understand that no one will be investing into coal anymore, or some heavy industry is also dirty industries based on coal. If we want to rebuild new heavy industries, but the question is, do we actually want? But if we want, it will not be based on coal. So what would the coal mining towns be doing then? What would be their role? They will have to go through the transition to something else, to another type of economy. And these kind of discussions are, the NGOs are trying to inspire these discussions of how this transition should happen. But in any case, it's progressing slowly, but we are raising these questions because it is important. For now, Ukraine for sure sees itself as a agriculture country, because we are a big agriculture country, but we are sure that we should add something on that and see how Ukraine could develop, within the green economy context. So next, on the next slide, here is how we define for ourselves at Ecoaction what green economy means. It's the green, so it's a sustainable construction realized with best available technologies and practices, but just to have a better idea. And we are working on that again within our scope and expertise. Next, and the next slide. Here, I just want to say a few words about more practical examples of green reconstruction and how to build back better. In fact, it's an enormous task. What we discovered is that no country after war has built back that much better. No country was building with large ideas in mind, meaning thinking really long term. Many of our colleagues from European countries that were rebuilt, where cities were rebuilt after the Second World War, say that it was about this mass production and building back faster, but definitely not about better. And we have the same level of risk in Ukraine at the moment because, of course, people want to build back faster on the first place, and environmental or long-term kind of aspects are largely not thought of, but we still want to integrate them. So again, I want to talk here about more practical examples and about energy sector. Just a few words about that. In energy sector, Ukraine will have to transit, again, from coal, from fossil heat plants, from energy inefficient buildings, which we have a plenty, and so on, to renewables, to using heat pumps in buildings, to improving energy efficiency of our building stock, and so on. and a new type of mobility and so on. This is largely speaking the picture. And then the next slide, please. And then importantly, what the war also taught us, what it brought us, is that we saw that this transition to renewables is something that we understand now. We understand now better what actually renewables could bring, what they are. They are a lot about resilience. So the centralized renewable energy system is a lot about resilience. If we think about a destroyed thermal power plant, it has been bombed, and then to fix it, it takes months or even years. So it's when it's a centralized power plant working on coal or gas, it doesn't matter. If it's a solar plant like this, it was shelled, you can see here, but then you move around the solar panels and you quickly fix actually the plant, and in just a few weeks it works again. Some of people in the north of Ukraine, we know some stories already that appeared after territories were liberated. Some of Ukrainians were actually had their lives saved. They had communication sustained during the occupation thanks to the solar panels on their roofs. They could call their relatives and to say that they were fine because there were complete blackouts, there was no electricity and so on because of the heavy fighting. And Ukrainians started seeing renewables differently. Next slide, please. And because of that, we thought, what about giving a very concrete example, trying to explain to the people, to population, and also actually to the government and also to the international partners, what we are talking about when we talk about green reconstruction, what it actually means. So together with other NGOs, we worked on kind of rebuilding an energy system of a hospital in the north of Kyiv. It's not far from Bucha, in a city of Horenka. And here we, this hospital was also, it's a small hospital, it's like a huge building, but nevertheless, it was shelled also by the Russian army. So this was fixed. Then we put solar panels on top, energy storage facility and heat pumps. In Ukraine is quite cold in winter, so we need nice heating. And this system was working also during the cloudy weather. It started working in January this year. And we showed how much it actually costs. So we have all of this infographics and everything. We showed that to the government, we showed it to the international partners, we brought them there. And why it was important, because this was the time, this winter, when everybody was sending diesel generators to Ukraine, which also was really critical and important because we had our energy infrastructure been shelled. But many cities were asking NGOs also to say, and generally speaking, they wanted something else because they realized that, diesel generators were super expensive, electricity from them was very expensive. So running them was really not that easy, dirty, polluting, and they have many disadvantages. And those communities who already had renewables in place, they said, we want something else. What could that be? And of course, there could be renewables, for example, especially for critical infrastructure, for hospitals, for water supply facilities, for kindergartens and schools that restarted their work recently. So this sort of project took place, and now we have more and more communities. Our partner organizations have already a big list of communities in Ukraine who are asking for this sort of projects, and we are working with international partners to scale this up as much as possible. And the government also became interested in having this sort of installations around Ukraine on hospitals. For Ukrainians, it's less about at the moment, it's less about, climate friendliness. It's a lot about resilience. And it's a lot about security. So this perception of renewables changed a lot. And I think that it can go beyond Ukraine because very often we cannot, NGOs cannot, I think, to an extent communicate why renewables are good because they still seem to be expensive and so on. But this issue of resilience can actually attract many people. And hopefully these stories from Ukraine can also reach out around the world and to also show that, this can work this can work well, and this actually means something much more than doing something climate friendly or environment friendly. I'm stopping here. There is already many publications in place, and I can share the link with you. There is by different partner NGOs and so on reconstruction, how to rebuild Ukraine back better. But then we wanted to also discuss with you, and it would be great to actually have questions from the audience too regarding how Russia's war on Ukraine, what kind of impact it had on the world, on the planet, and there is definitely lots of interlinkages there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. That was excellent. Thank you to Yevheniia as well. We have about a half an hour to address some of the questions that you have. We have three, all from Andrei. And it looks like a couple have been answered by Yevheniia. Before I go to Andrei, I did want to ask you both about the question of who will do this rebuilding. As we all know, a lot of folks have left Ukraine, obviously, and a lot of people are fighting in the army. So I would imagine that there's considerable labor shortage. And how is that factored into green reconstruction at the moment during this period when the war is still ongoing?
Yeah, I can jump in to say it's a huge issue, and if we take it on a larger scale, the question of the shortage of labor. When we think largely about rebuilding the country, we also have to be thinking about how to have people coming back, and not just coming back because the person can go back and have a rebuilt house and the road, but actually have nowhere to work. And this is why rebuilding Ukraine, and it's also a lot about rethinking this, what kind of economy we are building. Now the government tries to invest its time a lot into thinking about how private businesses could come. It will be indeed important. And it also is important to make sure that we engage communities. And this is something that is underlooked heavily in all of these discussions. Very often civil society and communities are underrepresented in talks about, like high-level talks about reconstruction. It's all about kind of government and IFIs and businesses, and communities are those, the cities, they are those who are more interested a lot into bringing people back. But again, coming back to this issue of the human resources in place, we have to be thinking of this larger ideas of how we rebuild the country to make sure that people are also inspired to go back, that they really want, and they see there is a potential, and again, that's something that can make them stay in there. And here there is a risk that many would be coming to Ukraine, many foreign companies, foreign interests coming to Ukraine, and already now we can see some kind of the ideas that exist in the EU, what Ukraine could be producing for Europe, so for the West, let's say, such as green hydrogen or critical raw minerals or something like that. And but for sure we can do much better. We can do many more things. We can be we have to be an equal partner in this discussion. So we have to be higher in the value chains of the whole of the EU, because we could be, if we talk about building a green economy, we could be producing heat pumps that everybody needs now in Europe. We could be producing high standard energy efficiency materials. Ukraine is already producing some parts of wind turbines. So there was a factory, quite a big production in the east, in Kramatorsk. It is now also partially under attack. It's quite close to the front line. And these production now moved to the west. And they are planning to enlarge together with German companies. And I think this kind of example, that this has to be growing. We have to be also making sure that we are seen as equal partners, and not just as a resource base, as we've been for agriculture, not just as a resource base for Europe, for everyone. This could draw, good brains in, I think. So Ukrainians in to make sure that they stay. They have this very interesting and good working places. But of course, the question is, how many countries would want to have Ukraine as a competitor in this? And probably no one. So Ukraine has to be fighting for it, in fact, and we have to define for ourselves what we actually want. It's a lot about people, and we see the shortage of human resources already today. The Ministry of Environment is shrinking, and so on. So definitely, there is not enough people in cities to be working on many topics, on many issues, on many. So you're raising a very important topic, but we have to be thinking strategically and also from the perspective of today of how to actually improve the situation.
Excellent, thank you. For both of you, let me bundle two questions together, one from Andre and one from Alyssa. And that is, what about environmental restoration? There has been an emphasis in your presentation on energy and obviously rebuilding energy systems and shifting from dirty energy systems to cleaner energy systems. His question is, well, why not a focus on environmental restoration from the damage caused during the war and ongoing? And then Alyssa's question about hazardous military waste and how that issue is being addressed today.
I can start about Andrei question about addressing the restoration of the environment. So we're now actually at the stage of researching and to understand what can be done, plus to understand at what stage we're actually with the pollution, because it's not the pollution that we used to, and so we need to understand what kind of practices exist. Plus I think I mentioned also during the speech that we're planning to have a fact-finding missions to look of what kind of type pollution is there, how big is it, and based on that it should be. So we of course can go case by case, which would be important for each communities, but at the same time civil society can't, as Ecoaction, even though we're biggest environment NGO with 30 people, we can't cover all communities in Ukraine, which is thousands. So that's why to actually create this stable change, we need to also change it at the legislation, to create the methodologies to teach people how to do it. So that's why we're mostly doing it from this side. So we're trying to research and we're trying to teach. Last week we actually finished, we had a project with a small grants, so we gave a small amount of money to the local NGO who is working with local communities, and they actually developed the vision for the green reconstruction, which also include restoration, adaptation to the climate change, which is now not that much addressed the reconstruction, but also important, especially now when the cities, the communities is rebuilding. They also might include the adaptation to the climate change, which we are also facing now with the war, but that's still it's getting, the temperature is rising. We're seeing floods during the summer. The winter is getting more soft and so on. So we see it, and with the years it would be faced even more. So it's actually at the time also a perfect time to address these challenges, to include them in our strategies and in the future avoid them. And I don't know, Anna, do you want to add here, or I can go to the waste question? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go to the waste question also. So about the military waste, how it will be addressed. Actually, Ecoaction is not working with this topic, so I learned a bit that there exists some factories industry in Germany who had example of utilizing some military tanks and other such stuff, but we never had experience in Ukraine. So And maybe the Ministry of Defense is thinking about it, but not publicly. But it's going to be a big challenge, especially that we know, for example, the numbers that Russia is losing, like how many tanks and different machines, but we don't know the side of Ukraine, how big losses from this side also. So we actually don't know the whole scale of the problem currently. Plus, yeah, we never had experience, and as we saw actually before the war started, we're still facing the problem with the regular waste management in Ukraine. So it might become a big challenge for us to deal also with the military waste, especially they actually would have like a big effect on environment, on the soil, on water pollution. So they might address like very fast, but at the same time, we unfortunately didn't have that much time. And you might see actually the first page of the presentation, if I'm right, that the picture was with the tanks that covered with the cabbage. We actually, it should happen now, but we don't actually have the resources to address the previous question, like, do we have a human resources? We don't have them. So that's why the people is adapting and they're using, for example, the same soil, which there's still tank that might like also pollute the area, but still people just growing around the cabbage and like other groups around. So it's how our life unfortunately look like.
Excellent. Thank you, Yevheniia. There was a question about debt and whether Ukraine will fall into the same kind of debt crisis or debt trap that other countries have fallen into. As you both pointed out, the scale of the need is so high, and Ukraine doesn't currently have the resources to cover all of those costs, and it has existing debt that it is, in some cases, it's been rescheduled for Ukraine. So the question really is, how will Ukraine avoid that kind of debt trap? But I also want to use that question to kind of move a little bit toward the issue of the global South. And as we are well aware, there's not as much support, shall we say, for Ukraine in the global South as we have found, for instance, in Europe, the United States, Korea, Japan, Australia. Condemnation of the invasion, yes, but not necessarily support for sanctions against Russia, for instance. So the question about debt raises this issue of, can there possibly be debt solidarity between Ukraine and countries in the global South, as well as climate solidarity? In other words, can some of the discussions you've been having around climate questions and climate justice questions, can that bring Ukraine closer to countries in the global South and perhaps boost support in that part of the world for Ukraine, both in terms of the war, but also in terms of economic connections as we hopefully move beyond the war?
Of course, I can understand why there is less support, and it does go from country to country. It's very different. So in the countries of Latin America, that would be different again. And mostly what actually happened is that Ukraine doesn't have that many connections with those countries, and even economic connections are very loose. They're practically non-existent because there hasn't been much exchange, human exchange or social or economic exchange in the last decades. As just in the world, as before 24th of February last year, most of the people associated Ukraine with kind of some post-Soviet country, Russia or something. So everybody started discovering us. I think we are also discovering the world now. Our diplomacy started working because we need this international support, trying to talk to all of the countries who may still be in the doubt and so on. We can see, of course, in the UN votes, who is voting how and how we are still lacking this support. And with every country, that would be probably, we would have to have different types of exchanges. So what we see in our topics, one of the issues is indeed climate related, energy transition related, where there is definitely links. I already mentioned that Ukraine is seen at the moment by the EU as a potential resource material base, again, for agriculture, but agriculture not only, actually with the EU, it may be tricky, the agriculture sector, but I will not be going into the details. But in terms of the production of critical raw minerals needed for energy transition, Ukraine is in this very same position as many countries of the global south. Therefore, we will have to be discussing and see actually how to move away from that, how to not be just shifting all of the raw minerals abroad and having low-paid jobs and so on, but to actually build up something different. And we started this discussions with also European colleagues who are trying to help countries around the world on that. But we are really at the very beginning, and I think it's a very long-term process. In climate, generally speaking, in the climate negotiations, Ukraine is really and has been in between a lot, because Ukraine is an industrialized country, and it had these heavy industries that actually polluted a lot and contributed to the global warming a lot. But we are also economically, we never developed to the level of our Western partners, so we cannot afford to do many things. And so the problem of the debt is there. Some say, I heard some discussions already, that perhaps Ukraine should be forgotten, the debt that exists as of today, to not keep increasing it. And in fact, we hear a lot of how countries claim they give assistance to Ukraine of different sorts, but we never know if it's a loan or if it's a grant, right? And probably only our government knows all of the details. We don't know. Everybody wants to show now their support. So there is many questions, and we will discover many things once the war is over, where we stand. And we are really in between of trying to build up, and we really want to build these connections with the world to make sure that we find these topics where we can be working together. It's definitely not something that we can do quickly. Russia has been doing a lot. Definitely, they've been working with many countries around the world on promoting their culture, on promoting, having embassies everywhere and so on, because they had resources and they saw it strategically important. And we see the results of this kind of strategic work. Unfortunately, Ukraine did not do that. So we have what we have, but again, it's just it's a potential opportunity to work on many things. Perhaps Yevheniia can add action in other topics. I just mentioned a few.
Yeah, it's probably just you actually talked a lot, so I don't know what to add more.
Well, thank you both for that. There's a question, I mean, Andy Berman in the Q&A has an interesting point about the President Zelensky recognizing the dangers of IMF loans back when he was in the TV series Servant of the People. So that's an interesting point to make, which you can comment on. But I want to bring attention to Olya's question. Do you see a need for educating hramadas or municipalities and facilitating cooperation among communities regarding circular city planning and green reconstruction? So really a question about political participation at a low level, or at a most local level, at the municipal level, the community level.
based on that example that I already mentioned, with the grants that we have, actually the communities, they're seeking for any examples for the expertise, for the support from any sites. And unfortunately, they never had a chance to have this experience before. And now they see actually the opportunity for them now to actually make it better. So any topics including the circular economy and like adaptation to the climate change and everything, they would be happy to address and to see the examples and actually to learn about it. I think we didn't mention it during the presentation, but one of the best reform in Ukraine before the war was decentralization, and actually during the first days of the war, during the first period of the war, we really survived because of this successful reform. During the last years, people and local authorities actually felt that they can be in power, they can decide for the communities, they have their own money, they can make decisions that they're gonna like gain from that. They might like develop business, they might invite investors and everything. And now it's actually also, we have like a few examples in Ukrainian cities who's not waiting until like someone is gonna come and help them. They are like moving all around the Europe or the world and looking for their partners for the exchange, for the information, how to rebuild their own cities better. And one of the example is Irpin, which like a lot of city probably now should like know it. So it's a great opportunity now, and they're actually looking for this opportunity to learn and to know how better to rebuild the cities and the communities.
And I'm just thinking, I totally agree with the communities, and actually their interest in the topic of reconstruction is very big. We haven't seen so many people participating in our webinars as we see today. So we were really surprised already last year when we were organizing in September, October, first webinars on green reconstruction for communities. And then we suddenly had so many people participating. We really like, now we build up this relations, and now relation of NGO with communities became important because NGOs now link communities with the national level and also with international level. Sometimes communities don't even speak English, so we have to help them to actually find these links and then also find the ways for international partners to help combine the needs and the will to help. And I also wanted to say a few words about not only the dangers of IMF loans, but generally how the situation looks like at the moment. And I think it's very also understandable that why it is like that. The government is open to all of the different proposals of foreign investments coming into Ukraine, because they see what's happening, they see the very bad situation we're in, the situation that the economy is in. So their only thought is how to actually have any investments at all during the time when there is no insurance, no guarantees for anyone. You know, for the moment, although the international partners are trying to work out what could be these guarantees. So the government's interest first is actually to have at least, you know, someone come in and to make sure that once the reconstruction starts, there is a big interest for the reconstruction already. There's hundreds of German companies already who are in the queue to enter once the war is over. And the same now for Italian companies and many others. So many are in the queue, that's fine. So this is happening. So we are trying to ask other questions. What we're going to be building? Is this going to be the reconstruction of everything like here and there? What is the plan? What is this economy we are building, you know? And then what kind of companies would be coming? If we want to build again this green economy, who's going to be coming and so on. So of course, now the government wants to build back faster, as I mentioned. Quality is maybe perhaps less of an issue at the moment that is not discussed. What we want to do is we want to try to make sure that when we build according not just to existing standards, but to better standards, to build some of the cities. What about having a climate neutral city, first climate neutral city in the whole of Europe in Ukraine? And some of our towns, we're working with coal mining communities, they would love to be this kind of pilot. Why not? And I'm sorry, this sounds probably this is actually very sad, but rebuilding the city that was completely destroyed is easier to make it climate neutral than building up on the city that already exists, right? So if we think larger, but we also have to go beyond, because we don't just want to place a city in the middle of nowhere and say this is a climate neutral town and it's great. There has to be something around, and these are the discussions hopefully of the coming years and so on, that we are starting up ourselves. Like today we are expressing these ideas and thoughts, sharing the ideas of other colleagues, and see how we can try to implement it together, because again the interest internationally is very big, yeah, it depends how much we inspire, but also of course on top of that, something we already discussed is, would we have people to be implementing that? Would people be back? How many could have good ideas, and how many could actually realize them and make them work?
Yes. When you talk about a model city, we've seen some model cities in other parts of the world. I mean, in Japan and in China, for instance, even in the Gulf state, improbably. But so it would be interesting to partner with a specific country around a model city, and then that country would get the additional publicity of exporting its version of a model city. And as we know, there are, especially Japan, China, the United States, European countries, construction companies are huge. I mean, and they push a lot of the investments and the agenda of what the final product should look like. So bringing in a construction company that is green and committed to a model city seems like the really important step at this point. I want to just bring up this one last question, and then we'll wrap up. And that Andre asked a question about Eco-Security Plan 2.0, Ukraine's Eco-Security Plan 2.0, which I'm not familiar with. So do either of you have any comments about what that is, or how it fits into what you have been describing today in terms of green, about the damages from the war, but also the potential for green reconstruction?
Yeah, there is 2.0 plan, which so there was a few phases of the plan. The previous one first was presented during Lugano conference, and in June there would be a second conference based on focus on reconstruction of Ukraine. So during this conference, they want to present an updated version of previous plan. We had a chance to comment as a civil society, and there was also other comments from international partners, from EU, and probably not only on the previous one. And since then, actually up until last week, I think we didn't have any news, and we was trying to actually understand what's happening with the plan and when do we see updated version. And the last week by the Minister of Environment, we were all working group, the people who was officially a part of the working group under the Ministry of Reconstruction, we've been invited to see the updated version. Unfortunately, as Ecoaction, we're still a process and to analyze, so I can't say any suggestions. But we're gonna publish all our letters and positions. We're publishing on our website, so you can always see them. The previous comments we also published last year. So the moment when we still have a bit of time and deadline, so we're gonna work on that and publish it.
Excellent, thank you. Anna, any last comments before we wrap up?
I would say, but I think Yevheniia mentioned a lot. It's good that as Yevheniia mentioned, that the reconstruction plans that they are being discussed. As we are still in the time of the war, of the active war, we see that the environmental issues are moved a lot aside. But I probably, as it's still it's the international community present today, we still have to say that Russia's invasion of Ukraine actually led to very important movements in speeding up energy transition, countries realizing their dependence on fossil fuels. And we didn't mention this today, but this is why sanctions against Russian fossil fuels exist, because this war is financed by fossil fuels. Largely. So this very tragic situation actually led to many changes in climate policies, of course in the EU, but also around the world. And also that the agriculture issues and also dependence on all the big global trade, and with the prices that, we saw the spikes in prices last year and so on, countries saw their vulnerabilities too, and hopefully that will also move countries to be working on their own agriculture and more sustainable production domestically. And that will be then a challenge for Ukraine, actually, how to reorganize its economy and so on. So if there is many important changes happening, and hopefully some of them are happening for better. But of course, we also see we will see militarization of globally, and then security issues are top of the agenda. But maybe last word to say that out of that, at least from our experience now in Ukraine, I mentioned this example of renewables and how they brought this resilience and security to at least some people, and they saw how things work. So we can work with this new aspect, with this new, I don't know how to call them, trends, or so we can work and should work with security issues and to bring them to the environmental and climate agenda and to combine them, because they are interlinked, and to make sure that we do progress with better environmental policies and climate policies globally, because again, this war revealed so many things that had to be, we were closing the eyes as if we didn't want to see them, but they were there. So they are revealed, and we have to be working with that. And I'm very glad to see today so many actually Ukrainians who also joined. So thank you also for the interest. It's great to see their questions, and of course, thank you very much for organizing this for the global audience. It's important that we discuss this as much as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Yevheniia. And thank you, Heather, for the translation as well, the interpretation. And thank you for all of those in the audience and your excellent questions. We will put up the recording, and I'll send out a note to everybody when it's up. And I would hope that you would not only see it again, but also send a note to your friends and let them know of this excellent event. So thank you again, and I will follow up with everyone with emails shortly. And again, thank you for our presenters who are really wonderful, and good luck with your work.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.